Hello, my name is Maria Abu Baker, and this is my child welfare presentation on foster care system and the reunification process. What we have to realize is that there was no child welfare system before the 19th century. Policies surrounding the well-being of children were barbaric and arcane. This was during a time that children had no rights and were seen as either labor or burdens. McGowan states that orphans, or the children of poor people, were either placed in almshouses or indentured out. Almshouses, by today's standards, are slum houses that were filled with diseased or disabled people who could not take care of themselves. The disadvantage of this was that children were also housed with common criminals. Indenturement meant that a child could learn a skill but would have to work until they paid off their debt of their apprenticeship. But it was later found out that these children would most likely be ill-treated and misused. By 1853, a radical by the name of Charles Loring Brants had an idea. He felt that orphaned and abandoned children who were living in the slums of New York could be socialized into productive members of society. His plan was to get them off the streets and into supportive Christian homes. Thus, the first free foster care systems were established. Years later, in 1912, the first federal agency protecting the rights of children was established by Jane Addams and Lillian Ward. The Children's Bureau was put in place to investigate instances that might endanger the well-being of all children. The downsides of these programs were that children were rarely returned to their homes and would live indefinitely in foster care homes or orphanages. What we have been discussing can be seen as the startup plan for many different institutional changes that will in the end be our child welfare system today. These institutions are the foundations of what we consider today's child welfare system, but what they sum up to is taking the children out of the home. Today, we see the other side of the cube. Today, we try to strengthen the family to be able to adequately care for the child in the home. Because my presentation will focus on the foster care system, I will explain how children enter the foster care system, what is the goal of the social service agency, what is the role of the foster care family, what are the programs does Georgia have to help these families with preservation, what are the birth families' expectations on reunification, and how we as social workers can continue to support families after the reunification process. Number one, how do children enter into the foster care system? Well, it kind of goes like this. Someone suspects that there is abuse or neglect in the home. The case is sent to a CPS worker to investigate if there is abuse or neglect taking place. Nationally, each year, there are an estimated 686,000 confirmed victims of child abuse. In 2013 alone, 101,563 reports of child abuse were in Georgia, but only about 30,951 were substantiated. Substantiated means that there was evidence of abuse taking place. Of those, 85% of the substantiated cases of abuse in Georgia were from severe neglect. Neglect as defined by Downs, Moore, and McFadden. They can be broken up into several different categories. The first is physical neglect. Physical neglect is when a parent fails to meet the basic needs of the child, such as food, shelter, and clothing. Another one is medical neglect. Medical neglect is when a parent does not seek medical help for a child or seeks it too late. Then we have inadequate supervision, when a parent leaves the child unattended or alone. And then there's educational neglect, when a parent fails to provide a child with access to education or does not enforce truancy laws. The last one that we will discuss is the addiction or exposure to drugs. And this is when a child is born with drugs in their system or is exposed to it on a daily basis. About 11% of all substantiated cases of abuse in Georgia were from physical abuse. about 5 from sexual abuse, but no cases were from psychological abuse. Abuse as defined by Downs, Moore, and McFadden. Physical abuse is the unreasonable punishment that could result in broken bones, severe welts, eye damage, bleeding, or any other injury that requires medical attention. Sexual abuse is when a child is pressured into sexual acts with an adult or another child that can be included but is not limited to fondling, penetration of any kind, and indecent exposure. Psychological maltreatment refers to the repeated pattern of behavior that conveys to a child that he or she is unwanted, worthless, valued only to the extent that he or she can be used, and is threatened with physical or psychological attack daily. If there is no case of abuse in the home, then the case is screened out. Screened out is when a situation does not meet the state's definition of maltreatment or not enough information is supplied. In this case, there is no further action by the CPS worker. In a case where the substantiation is screened in, that is where there is enough evidence to suggest maltreatment to the child and that the CPS worker needs to proceed. Nationally, there are roughly 400,000 children in foster care on any given day. 7,500 of those children reside in Georgia. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the goal of the social service agency in this predicament? Well, the goal of the CPS agent is to do a risk assessment of the safety concerns of the child. If there are no findings, then the family may just be referred to community service. If there is some risk, then the CPS worker investigates and further action must be taken, and the children must be taken out of the home. In this presentation, we will talk about the children being placed in foster homes. Foster care is a term used for a system in which a minor has been placed in a ward, a group home, or a private home of a foster parent. Since the goal of the child welfare system is for the safety and permanency of the child, all parties involved, birth parents, foster parents, and the CPS worker must work together to ensure a positive outcome. If for some reason there is no positive outcome, the child can permanently be removed from the home. So, in the instance of foster care, what exactly is the role of the foster family? The foster family is responsible for the day-to-day caretaking of the child in regard to food, shelter, clothing, and access to education. They are also responsible for promoting and working with parents on family reunification plans. They have to engage the child in developing relationships with their birth parents, which may include attending or supervising visitations. The role of the foster care parent can be hard to bring a child into your home, build a relationship with them, and love them like their own, all with the hopes that they will eventually return to their birth parents. Statistics show more children stay in foster care for over 2 to 4 years. In some cases, the role of the foster parent may lead to adoption. If the parents or parent is non-compliant with the rulings of the court, fails to provide adequate housing for the child, continues to be abusive toward the child, or makes no move to visit or be involved with the child, adoption may be an alternative to continued foster care. When dealing with the birth family, there are expectations on the reunification process. These expectations are directly correlated to the offense that led to the removal of the child. Objectives that can be court-ordered and include with a case plan goal when dealing with family reunification may include, but are not limited to, drug and alcohol classes or treatment as needed, random drug analysis, safe housing, legal employment, keeping a safe distance from abusive people, attending needed life skill classes, attending therapy or counseling as needed, attending and participating in a case plan with meetings with the case manager. Parents also have to be reassessed if they are in compliance with the rules of the court and the case plan constructed with the case manager. Then the next step is to transition the child back into the home. During this process, visitations are increased as the reunification process starts. After the child is back in the home, there are still routine home checks by the social worker for about 18 months after the transition has taken place. If at such time the reunification is successful, the case is then closed. In 2012, more than half the children placed in foster care were reunited with their families. Some interesting facts about foster care and reunification. About 40% of all children in foster care are non-Hispanic African American children. And then put with that most children of color are less likely to be reunified with their families. And then you have a sad fact. Another fact is that children who are reunited with their families are more likely to end up back into foster care. When we're thinking about reunification, we have to think about what plans does Georgia have in place to support family reunification and preservation. According to the Georgia Department of Human Services website, Georgia has several programs put in place to help stabilize families and promote a healthy home environment for the child. Parents who have open CPS cases are not eligible for preventive measures that are in place to help families, but can qualify for these 3 programs. The first one is Parent Aid. Parent Aid is a program established to give in-home, community-based education to parents who are experiencing heightened levels of stress. This program's main objective is to strengthen the parent-child bond and to build relationships, trust, and help parents understand the child's needs and how to positively address those needs. Some services provided included but are not limited to food and nutrition education, homemaking skills, and budgeting. The second one is the Prevention of Unnecessary Placement, which is the PUP program. It is put in place to reduce the contributing factors that may lead to maltreatment. Some services that they may provide include psychiatric and substance abuse assessments, emergency housing, and temporary child care services. As with the Parent Aid Act, if the family is experiencing extreme cases of abuse or neglect, the PUP should not be used. Instead, they have something for that. It's called the Homestead. Homestead is put in place to deal with extreme cases of abuse or neglect. It works to meet the immediate needs and concerns of the family who are in need of intensive therapeutic intervention. Homestead programs provide comprehensive assessments, family support, counseling, and crisis intervention to manage the risk factors contributing to child abuse and neglect. As social workers, we can continue to support family reunification by first engaging not only the family but the extended family in the reunification process. Number 2, connecting the family with social services that improve family and social functioning. Number 3, we can empower families to continue to reach out for help and not to be conformed to the stigma attached to that. And also, we need to work to diminish the stigma that is attached to the CPS worker and having a CPS case. In conclusion, there are thousands of children who are subject to abuse and neglect. Many of these children are taken from their homes and placed into the foster care system. The objective, in most cases, is to reunite these children with their families. In order to do this, these families have to become healthy and safe for the reunification process to begin. By following the case plan and meeting the requirements set by the court system, over half of these children placed in foster care do return to their families. Those who do not often remain in foster care, are placed with relatives, or are adopted. As a social worker, my job is to ensure the safety and permanency of the child. By working with the birth parents, the foster parents, and the maltreated child, we seek to build better relationships, trust, and a safe home environment for